Welcome to the MX podcast featuring Dan Roberts.
Hey, so welcome to another episode of the podcast. In today's episode, I have the wonderful Sophie Tomas, the author of this book, which came out about a week ago. You know, I try to be on the ball and current. She's also a certified MX instructor. I've known her for many years. She's awesome. And I think you're going to enjoy our conversation today. All right, let's go.
Brilliant.
Let me just check I'm recording. Good. I did a podcast 2 weeks ago where I forgot to record. It was so embarrassing.
No.
So embarrassing. So embarrassing. An American guy had to do it all again, 2 days later.
Oh my God.
Such a sheepish phone call. I was like, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
It's like an hour and a half conversation.
Said, can you do it again? Yeah.
So bad. But I've had it happen to me as a guest, and I'm like, fine, these things happen. So it's like when you're a trainer, if you're really, really strict about clients being late, then you screw yourself up if you're late. So if you're really relaxed, then it's all cool. So I'm very relaxed.
Don't throw stones into greenhouses. Exactly.
Hi, Sophie. Welcome to the MX podcast. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me on today, Dan. It's an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. For people watching on YouTube, I've nearly finished your book. Brilliant book. I'm really enjoying it. Well done.
So that's very kind of you.
With Fitlosophy, how did you come up with the concept? Because it's quite hard sometimes to mix philosophy and fitness, and
yeah,
it's not the most obvious thing to write about.
It's not.
What's the idea?
You know, it's funny you say that, Dan, because in terms of mental gymnastics, I think you have to be on a whole level of calisthenics in my view to somehow find the link. I somehow did, but in the book I talk about it a little bit. It stems from a mixture of personal experience and my knowledge of psychology, because in my eyes, it's always been my opinion, and generally speaking, actually, it's not even necessarily opinion. It's when you look at the research, it kind of agrees with this notion that philosophy is kind of the grandfather of psychology. You only need to look at CBT. The founder of CBT was inspired by people like the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius, who everyone knows because he's a very, very famous guy when it comes to resilience and modern day living. And as a result, I saw that connection. That came from a more, cerebral perspective. But then, to be honest, it came from a lot of a very personal perspective when at the time, it was about 10 odd years ago, when I was a teenager, I was suffering really bad mental health. I felt very lonely at school. And I remember at the time I was training because I was doing a lot of modeling in my teenage years. And initially, it's obviously the case of, got to lose that puppy fat or staying in shape for shoots, which is a very superficial and unfortunately a realistic part of the game in that aspect.
Yeah.
So I was attending the gym. I was getting my grapple on. I was grappling with, strength training and getting my familiar grounds with the gym, because for me, I always saw the gym as something almost like the human equivalent to a hamster wheel. You go in, you just go on a treadmill, and that's it. But obviously, as I started to get myself used to the surroundings a bit more and befriended a lot of personal trainers and got to coach myself there, I realized that was so much more than just the physicality aspect of it. And I remember one time I was feeling particularly down. I remember this vividly. I was in sixth form, and I felt that I was having a particularly bad day at school. I wasn't really connecting with the girls that well. And this was before I was going home to go to the gym, because at the time that was my main solace, going in there feeling strong when I wasn't feeling as confident and empowered at school. Yeah. And the first book I came across on the shelf was it's not really a book, it's more of his essay or piece of work, was Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. And obviously the first page of The Myth of Sisyphus,
when you're feeling down.
I mean, the first page obviously is the first thing the biggest thing in philosophy is that should we commit suicide, which
that's
is
my first
it hits you right in the face. But it is such a, at the time when you're feeling that low, you don't really think about, you're so bogged down in quite a solipsistic, self-involved, and I don't mean that in a selfish way, but you are very much in your own deluge, in your own mud.
You're trying to figure out your identity at that age as well, so it's
exactly, yeah. You don't know what anything's about, really. Yeah. You don't know what you're about, and so to have that really stark reminder of how how fleeting mortality can be was a really big wake-up call, because I realized then actually, me going to the gym wasn't just me rolling a boulder off the hill. It gave me a lot of purpose and strength. And so since then, I was really interested in that connection between mind and body. And it was only been in like recent years when I've been engaging in my psychology masters and really reading my philosophy and studying it on the side in courses, that I was seeing this really strong relationship between cerebral and just general holistic development and physical fitness. In fact, I mean, if you look at like individuals like Plato and Socrates and even Nietzsche, they discuss the importance of exercise for their own ideas and writing. Even though some of them, as you can, I mean, Nietzsche was, I don't think he was a very happy man at the end of his life. The fact that what they came up with in terms of human resilience and development was really reminiscent of what a lot of the fitness industry and individuals in the fitness industry talk about themselves. So that's how I kind of came up with the connection. And actually, as you read more schools of thought in philosophy and even psychology, you see a lot of intersects between different approaches in terms of habit and ideas in fitness. I mean, an example off the top of my head now, I mean, we're seeing it a lot on social media, and I don't agree with it myself, but, you have a lot of discussions regarding diet culture, and obviously there is the harmful notion of diet culture, which is completely valid. But then it becomes more postmodernist in that sometimes truth gets obscured with a little bit of relativism, and that's certainly not bad in many cases. And I actually use this example in the book, talking about how sometimes you need that softness and openness for individuals to feel more welcome in the fitness industry again. And then for some individuals, it's a bit too vague. They need that concrete idea of notions and numbers and progress in that regard. And then it got me thinking. And so in that instance, you have two very different philosophical ideas and very different fitness approaches, and the two mirror each other. So it was through a mixture of my personal experience, my studies, and even just experiencing the industry itself alongside my reading, that I was seeing how they just intersperse so commonly. And you don't really realize it until one day. I think I was reading a book on a philosophical language and how language constructs itself in the world and how we perceive language. And I was realizing how similar the ideas of linguistics and concepts shape themselves in everyday life, like fitness and getting just healthy and well, and how different approaches will merit and benefit other people. And that's why I came up with the idea of Fitlosophy. Everyone has a different Fitlosophy in the same way that different thinkers have their own philosophies. And I know it's actually quite an interesting thing, because personality is a very hot topic in terms of understanding ourselves and psychology, but it's such a vast thing. Many of us don't, I barely know who I am. Many of us are always going through incremental growth and questioning ourselves, and who we are underpins most of our actions, it's why it's really important to kind of understand why we do the things we do. Yeah. And that's also one of the things, it's one of the reasons why I don't believe in, personally, I don't believe in horoscopes and such, but it is one of the reasons why it's so popular. It's so vast, the idea of personality and who we are. Having these tidbits or like even just avenues and glimpses into who we can be or what we do gives us a bit more grounding, and it enables us to at least have a framework on how to, right, exactly, and navigate the world.
To grasp onto things, be it true, it's kind of, it's too basic to say true or false, but to actually to grasp onto ideas to help us navigate through life is a very human thing.
Absolutely. And that's where the structure of the book came through, because then I realized that philosophy is not the most bright and colorful subject, and it can be, you just read one book of Kant or Hegel and you think, I'm not reading this ever again. It's very difficult to even enjoy. So I realized I wanted to put it in a kind of in a format that people related to and people could actually latch onto, so they could use it practically, because I think that's the most important thing, to use.
You're right. It's a shame. Great philosophers who are terrible writers.
Oh yeah, terrible.
As in most.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, and it's a shame. You're right. There's so many amazing ideas and really kind of like wild things we can learn about, but if a book like that written, it doesn't always appeal to us.
No, absolutely. And it's a shame, especially for coaches who want to better understand their clients, because you're coaching and helping so many vast numbers of people, potentially all with their own different experiences, biological predispositions, and just different formats of how they assimilate information or in the world around us, which is huge. different brains, different biologies, different environmental factors that have helped format who they are today. And so you have this at your disposal. So better understanding ideas about the human condition, I think, enables you to have a much wider toolkit at your disposal for coaching different people. Like the term difficult client, I actually don't like. Yeah, exactly. I don't like the term difficult client because I think if I'm a coach, it's on me to do the work and to make sure I understand this person as best I can to help them. If I write them off as a difficult client, that's on me. That's not on them. They've done nothing wrong. That's my judgment and predisposition to say, nah, they're not great to work with, or I find them really hard to work with. It's my job to work with this person, so I have to do my best.
That's a sign of a great
and
coach,
work
Sophie.
my hardest. You know.
That's
very kind of you.
I know a lot of coaches, and the best ones, they always take personal responsibility, and they don't talk about. They don't fire clients who don't stick to their contract. They don't sell their own nightmare. It's kind of beginner coaches who say that, who aren't really skilled enough. You know, so
and I think, you know, there's losing clients, I think, is part of the game, whether it be external reasons or for personal reasons of the client or the coach. And even if it's as simple as, a client's moving away or their finances have changed, I always still ask myself, what could have I done? Which feeds into the idea of some philosophical ideas in the book, you know. And I think regardless of which philosopher or idea or trajectory you fall into in any worldview, I think it's fundamental that you look at it, cleaning your own side of the street, so to speak, in anything in life, especially in coaching and especially in understanding people. And you see philosophers, whether someone agrees with him or not, on philosophers like Karl Marx, who were very collectivist ideas about there's no such thing as the individual, and a society unfolds historically through a collective conglomerate or group of factors. It's still very much about the individual and what the individual can do in that system. So it's really important, I think, in any idea, whichever one latches onto you best, to take responsibility for what you believe in and how that actually forms out into your actions.
I mean, I found it really interesting reading. Like I haven't finished it yet, but because I haven't thought about it in that way. Obviously, I've studied philosophy like at university, but you know, when I was reading the first chapter, I think was Marxism, wasn't it?
I actually wrote him the first because I thought this is going to be one of the trickiest ones, because I don't want people to think I'm necessarily a sympathizer for terrible things.
Yeah.
And it was also the hardest one to get right because he's vastly complex in terms of his writings and ideas.
Yeah.
So that's why it was the first one, actually. It was practical.
But I found myself, you know, talk about awareness. I found it really good fun reading this. I'm finding it really good fun because I can't help. I guess I'm being quite egotistical. I'm thinking about myself rather than thinking about my clients. And I'm like, okay, I'm definitely not a Marxist philosopher. I'm a little bit like Aristotle. I'm a little bit, very Kierkegaardy like you are, but I'm definitely not this, a tiny bit of Stoicism. It's like, it's really interesting. And I'm like, then I'm thinking about other coaches. And oh my God, they're so Kantish and they're so, you know, I've never thought
that's part of the fun of it.
Coaching styles to be like that. And I loved your chapter on Kierkegaard. You can see you really like him. And you're in that chapter.
Kierkegaard is my favorite. He is my favorite. Kierkegaard is my favorite because I feel like there's he's really interesting because his ideas seem religious at first, but actually anyone, regardless of creed or non-creed, can really buy into what he's saying about leaps of faith and values. And also it's very interesting. I found this out recently. He essentially invented the word angst. He wrote an essay on anxiety. So he was the forebearer of the hashtag mental health awareness before any influencer was. So, you know, he set the trend.
And he was the guy who said, if you label me, you negate me, which is like brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, in this world we live in nowadays, it's very current. You know?
I know. And that's also something I try to stress in the book. As much as it's fun, as you say, it is fun to, you know, it's a bit like the personality test you do online. It is quite frivolous and fun. Think, oh, I'm a bit like that. Or, yeah, I do that. There's no idea or no approach that is inherently wrong or something you have to inherently stick to and live by and die by.
I think you make that point really clear because you always say, and I was like going, oh, yeah, I'm more like that. And then at the end, you're like, yeah, but maybe that's not good. I was like, oh, yeah, maybe. It's like, you're always kind of like, you show the other side of it, which is interesting.
Thank you very much. That's really sweet of you. I think what's important in that regard as well, as you say, is that anything can be taken to extremes. And if it's not benefiting you in the long term regarding development or even just well-being, that's why it's worth looking out and learning from other people, learning from other philosophers, and learning about other approaches. And at first it might feel very uncomfortable to try something new or read about something new or to absorb it. But in the long run, you start to benefit from toolkits that you never had before. So I really wanted to make sure that there was a kind of vast approach to different philosophers and thinkers, because I think that's the most important thing. Intellectual diversity helps you be more understanding of others and understanding of yourself as well.
Well, I think also it's a safer, if you come across a new idea, it's much better to delve into it in a book in your own space rather than say on social media where you automatically feel defensive and you have to kind of defend your own point. You can actually, that's not the place to really learn. But in books, you can be by yourself in your own space. No one knows what you're reading. So you can read something completely the opposite of what you think your philosophy is or your ideas are. And you can sort of like, slowly assimilate it and then make, better decisions, hopefully.
I absolutely agree. And I think there's a beautiful privacy about a book, as you say, that you just don't get from social media. Even when, people often use the phrase, do your own research, or social media is great for research or accessing.
No one with half a brain ever says that.
I mean, it's just, this is unfortunately a phrase that I have heard. It tends to be among certain population groups or certain groups of individuals. But I've heard this phrase saying, this is a great account, you'll learn so much from it. And I do think there's a benefit in terms of thinking about the value you can utilize in a digital era, which, for better or for worse, here. Thinking about the value and what you put out in content is meritorious. But I also believe that we're so used to now having this quite short-term based attention span where you read a post, there's no nuance because there's only so many characters you can get in there. And you have this quite witch hunty era where people might think, oh, that person's liked this post or follows this person, or does that mean they think this, or oh, they agreed with that post, that means they're automatically a bad person. This very black and white type of thinking, which is quite prevalent.
Yeah, I think it's loaded, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's very fast and very instant, whereas a book is wonderful because you can sit back, as you say, you can absorb it, you can put down the book, you can walk away, you can think, do I agree with that, do I not agree with that, or that this part really resonated with me, I didn't think of that before. And it's a wonderful journey that you miss out with totally if you don't read, really.
And the reason I like books as well is like I always do. Obviously, I know you, but I've known you for years. But before I read any book, I like doing a little bit of research on the author because I find it then informs the words more. So, and I like the idea, because I've known you for a while, I like the idea of you being, I know how well read you are and I know how smart you are, but the fact you spend hours and hours writing and drafting and rewriting and really thinking about this, for me, it's like, I know you've put time into it. And I sort of respect that. And then rather than like a post on social media, no matter how great it is often just like, oh, how can I get more likes, or how can I, or I'm just going to write something. I know when I write on social media, it's not massively well thought out compared to when I write courses and when I write proper things. I usually do it in a second. I'm like, oh, there we go. And when I look back, I'm like, oh, it's a bit basic, but it's you put thought into it. So that's why books are always better, because you can get well thought out ideas which have been actually mulling around in the author's head and articulated properly. Because I know this isn't a first draft. Books don't come out in one draft. You have to rewrite. So
the admin involved is probably arguably worse than the writing process. I remember the admin afterwards, the spell checking and just the formatting and making sure the chapters were
right. Was it a lot bigger?
Like that.
Was it a lot bigger initially?
It was around the same size. There was just some faff I cut out in regard, especially the Stoicism section. I cut out that bit quite a bit, and there was some movement.
Now I'm about to read.
Yeah, because the Stoicism
very trendy.
I won't spoil it, but the school of Stoicism is so vast, especially nowadays. You have your Ryan Holidays talking about it all the time. I try to focus on the bits that don't really get talked about that much. So, for instance, the ethical aspect of Stoicism doesn't get talked about a great deal. It's implied through the posts and the memes people post, which is fine. But the ethical structure, like the moral philosophy behind Stoicism, doesn't get talked about a lot. So I try and mention that a bit more in terms of what it means to live a valuable life. Because, for instance, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations gets rightfully so quoted so much because it's a wonderful piece. But the reasonings behind why he wrote the things and the reasonings behind why he considers X action to be valuable over this doesn't really get talked about because it's hard to fit it all into a post or a video or even like a self-help book which doesn't focus on philosophy. It does its job, but it doesn't focus on that. It's not its main focal point.
Yeah, the problem is
so that was
nowadays
really
people
fun to
borrow,
write.
don't they? They borrow ideas and repurpose them.
Yeah.
So it's, I think with Stoicism, it's like you can very easily dumb it down to be like, you know, emotionally stunted and tough and resilient, and that's it.
Yeah.
But it's clearly more than that. But if you only, I don't know, like follow bodybuilders on Instagram, or maybe like listen to David Goggins types, you know, where it's kind of like a very obvious version of like, my God, that's like hardcore levels of mental resilience. You think, oh, that's stoic, but it's like it's obviously more than that. That's why reading helps.
Yes, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with having that resilience. And I would argue, you know, sometimes you get both extremes, especially in modern day discourse. You get the extreme where it's like everything you do is valid, which I just, as a phrase, doesn't really make sense. So, because in terms of terminology, valid, you can't really validate the human being, especially if a human life is inherent worth, which most philosophers agree they do, unless you are an anti-naturalist or nihilist. But most philosophers would argue if you have inherent worth, you can't validate that in of itself. It is, and it's good in of itself. And then, you know, you end up almost enabling certain behaviors, which I don't think is good in the long run, for my clients, for myself, for anyone. And then on the other spectrum, you have, as you say, that very David Goggins-esque, you know, mentality of being hard, I believe. Stay hard is what he said, I think. Lots of ice showers. No, I mean, that's Wim Hof, but everyone loves ice showers now. There is some research behind it.
I did it for a week because our central heating broke and it was hideous. It was hideous. And I didn't enjoy any of it. I didn't learn anything. I didn't become more resilient. I was just very cold and a little bit grumpy for like an hour. So it doesn't work for everybody.
You're gonna start going sleeping in red light and having bulletproof coffee. I know. Well, this is the thing about routines, and that's what I talk about in the book as well. What works for one person, as cliche it is, doesn't work for another. And the routine that works for you isn't the one that looks shiniest on Instagram or looks the most, you know, hashtag entrepreneurial. It's the one that gives you long-term benefits, and gives you the productivity that you need for your life and enables you to achieve your goals. And you can't do that if you're freezing and grumpy in the morning, frankly. Like, you don't.
Yeah, you're right. We're all different.
I can't be cold in the morning. I won't get out of bed. It's too cold and terrifying and dark. I need to be warm, or I won't get anything done.
So are you not one of these high achievers who get up at 4 a.m. with a 10K run?
God, no. I mean, I get up early, but to work. As in, if I've got a client before work, I'll have to get up at 5 or so. But I think that's quite normal. Like, you know, it's funny when I see personal trainers talk about the grind. I just think, but it's not really. It's normal, because if your client's got work, let's say at 7 or 8 even, of course you're going to get up early. It's just the nature of your job. But then they'll probably have the rest of the day free. It's just like, where is this grind you talk about?
It isn't a grind. It's like, I think
especially when
the world of personal training is it's such an easy job, really. It's just hanging out with people and
really, yeah.
I the last episode I recorded, which isn't out yet, was of an LA trainer called Gunnar Peterson, who you probably know, very successful trainer, been around for a long time. And I was asking his advice on behalf of trainers, who trainers feel, you know, sometimes trainers get a bit stuck in a rut and they feel a bit, you know, like their career's not going places. And we're kind of chatting about it. And we came to the conclusion that you should just have a normal job for 2 weeks. Then you'll realize how amazing it is to be a trainer, because people complain 100%. So much about clients or this. And it's like, I mean, he's probably the most famous trainer I can think of in the world, very incredibly successful. He loves it. He loves it. He doesn't complain. He likes being called a trainer. He loves doing it. He gets up at 4 a.m. every day. Yeah. Lots of clients at 4:30 or 5. And it's like, it's like, you know, it's older than me anyway, but I'm not saying how old he is, but it's amazing. And I love that. And it's like, the people who are most successful are usually humble and they appreciate what's going on. The people who are not very successful tend to complain a lot.
I'm biased because I think it's one of the best jobs in the world, because it's you're helping people, you're making a difference, you're doing something enjoyable, you're not stuck in an office doing something that you're not really purposeful about. And actually, it's funny. I think our clients, some can be some of the best testimonials to why you should be a personal trainer. Because sometimes the stuff they talk about in their jobs, I'm like, I could not do what you do. I'd be miserable. Exactly. And it's really interesting. And for them, that hour is magical. It's transformative for them. It's a time to talk and discuss and have time beyond the cubicle office, for instance, or even long hours if you're not training an office worker. They've got very stressful expectations on their shoulders. As a coach, you have the ability to help people feel a bit better than they last did when they came in to train with you. And I think that's tremendous. It's a privilege. It really is.
Yeah, totally with you. All right, so let's go back a step, because like I say, I really enjoyed your Kierkegaard chapter, but for those listening who aren't maybe massively into reading philosophical texts, can you give an overview of the chapter of Kierkegaard and your philosophy, the Fitlosophy of Kierkegaard?
Of course. So with the Kierkegaard Fitlosophy, this was a really interesting one because I liked writing it a lot. I think the Kierkegaard philosophy, I'll give a little overview slightly of like what Kierkegaard kind of posited.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ideas, obviously. Like in the book, all these philosophers have so many different ideas. I mentioned I can only distill a few basic ones that are notorious or most famous for. And in Kierkegaard's case, I chose the different ethical stages. So essentially, in a nutshell, Kierkegaard was a very religious man at the time, very religious and at times anxiety-ridden young man, who got a lot of criticism from the church at the time when he was alive, because he had quite, according to their views, heretical views about what it meant to be ethical religion. Now, what Kierkegaard actually did was suggest that values are individuals. So he did this by saying human beings essentially have different stages in their life, and it doesn't have to be in chronological order, and people can go back to one stage or go visit another and think that stage isn't right for them. And they live through these stages and develop what they consider to be valuable in their life. So you have different kind of stages. You have the hedonistic stage, essentially, which is basically, I guess, like every kind of like student-esque young 20s person, just living life, enjoying, traveling. And in my eyes, I think it's a very necessary stage. Pardon me.
Necessary.
I got that out there in the end. I can say Kierkegaard. I can't say necessary. There we go. I can't even say that. Great start, Sophie. These are pivotal, I think, in understanding who you are, because by doing the late nights, by doing the hedonistic stage, as Kierkegaard would say, the partying, the drinking, the excess, the very indulgent stage,
as it were,
exactly. Yeah, you cannot understand what it feels like to feel like crap after a night out, or after eating too much junk food, or not doing anything that feels productive. You actually need that sensation of, not necessarily of a all-time low, but you need that sensation of feeling like, I've had my fun and it was great, but I kind of feel very floaty now. I feel like I'm not actually making different stages. So it's really interesting because I feel like you see these stages, piling out through one's fitness history. So you go from this hedonistic stage into the ethical stage, the very kind of strict, rigid stage. So you could say that this might be like, it's almost like the same kind of swing. If someone goes, right, I've been partying too much, it's been a really heavy Christmas, I'm going to just restrict in a very loose term. So the ethical stage that Kierkegaard kind of understood in his terms was someone who tried to rigidly do the right thing. So would be very pious and would always be prioritizing like virtuous actions as opposed to hedonistic actions, the complete opposite essentially of the first stage. So if you look at this in terms of just lifestyle, and I talk about this in the book, we've gone from someone who's, partaken in parties, lots of travel, not much work, lots of junk food, not much exercise, for the sake of enjoyment, for the sake of pursuing hedonistic desires. We've gone from this to more ethical stage of living. So this person might be concerned with doing the right thing, being very value driven, and always being concerned about like what the greater community at large is wanting of them. And at face value, this seems like a very good thing, especially if you're looking to transform your health and be a better person. You're going to be more other orientated just by proxy of thinking about this. So the problem, as Kierkegaard stated, and this is a problem you see in the fitness and diet and eating industry even, is that if this person is preoccupied with what others think and what others want, you start to lose your own sense of self. You start to lose what values are key and fundamental to you. So this second stage is starting to develop like kind of a notion or a cognitive understanding of what it means to not think of yourself the whole time. But you get swept up in the other side of things, whereby it's essentially thinking and being preoccupied with the community. In Kierkegaard's case, this was the church. So, he would often say that these churchgoers would be very concerned about putting on an appearance or or trying to do the greater good for the church without thinking about what they actually wanted to do for themselves and be the person that they really wanted to be in a well-rounded sense.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself, enveloped in this idea, I need to eat this, I need to train like this, going to David Goggins, let's say, as an example, it might be the case that you're thinking about what is a perceptually, good routine, or what is at first glance, the best kind of lifestyle for you, without thinking about what works for you as a person.
Yeah, you're feeling like what you should do as opposed to what really feels.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's more obligatory and it's duty based. It's actually quite Kantian in a way. And the third stage, which is sort of like this beautiful, it comes to this like beautiful culmination of all these two stages in the growth of this individual. Even though God never explicitly states as an end goal, I do think he implies with this third stage, this is kind of the ideal that people should opt for, because you've kind of processed everything that's happened behind you in these prior stages, and you've come to this nice little third stage, which is called or known as the religious stage, but it doesn't actually really have much to do with religion in terms of practicality. He named it the religious stage because it was essentially aimed at individuals who went to church, who believed in God, who were theists or Christians, and realized that the teachings that they were coming across from religion wasn't just kind of this sheep following the shepherd kind of ideal, that they weren't just numbers in a flock, that actually through the learning of their faith and something that was a bit bigger than they were able to just cultivate ethics and a set of values that meant something for them, that wasn't just what they should do as per society or as per other people, but what they deemed to be good for them and to be a good person on their grounds. So I think in terms of fitness and lifestyle, this is when you start to see through the fads, you start to see through all these individuals talking about very generalized plans, generalized approaches to training and nutrition. So, looking at things like, a good example is weightlifting. I love weightlifting. I lift all the time, but someone might look at it and think, this actually doesn't work for me. This isn't how I want to get really fit and strong, but I found something, a sport that I can redevelop my skill in. So I'm going to indulge myself in this, or envelop myself in this, and just learn and be the best I can be at this sport, with martial arts, for instance. And because this is what I want to be involved in. This is my form of fitness and what it looks like to be strong and engaged in with the world in an active, healthy way. And it's to actually be more assertive in yourself and your needs in what works for you, rather than what other people or other quote unquote experts or gurus might say to you is the best thing to do. So it's this kind of beautiful growth. That's why I love Kierkegaard. It's not static. It's not this kind of regimented set of rules or guidelines you should follow. Part of Kierkegaard's beauty, I think, as a thinker, is he advocates for this journey and path, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think that's what fitness is also mirrors so well.
Sometimes it's not just like a journey like this. Sometimes we go back into the hedonistic for a bit, and we can
exactly. It's never linear. And actually, for instance, having that understanding, that self-compassion, but also understanding of where you're at and awareness of where you're at and where you would like to be, it kind of helps with that sweet spot. So you're not self-flagellating when you're in that position, but you're also not letting yourself go off too easy as well, because you have this understanding of what felt good when you're living in your own values, but also understanding that you are human, and that need for that hedonistic desire or need to be quite regimented at times will happen and ebb and flow, and there's no inherent wrongness about that either. So I love Kierkegaard, and I had a great time writing about him.
No, I can see. No, I do too, and it's a great chapter. It's my favourite one so far.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my favourite chapter as well. Thank you.
You can tell there's more kind of it's coming out of it. But also, even though it's not linear, it kind of is in a way. It is a kind of a way of looking at aging, because as we get old, when we're younger, we have extreme
100%.
ideas politically and through fitness and everything. Relationships, they tend to be quite extreme ideas, and we tend to go one way, and then we tend to rebel against that at some point in our 20s, and then as we get into our 30s, we usually kind of get more of an even keel, and usually by 40s we have to know what's going on normally. That's normally how it works. In terms of fitness, in terms of our politics, in terms of our views on life, it tends to be less extreme. That's one of the benefits being a coach, being a personal trainer or any kind of coach, is that you work with people at different age groups all the time. So you're exposed, and you kind of, after a while, if you only train 50-year-olds, you realize are. They're not just being boring. That's what happens when you're 50. You don't value going out partying. If you only train 19-year-old rock stars, then you realize that's just that's right for them at that time. The way that they're hedonistic thing. Of course, it'd be weird if they were, acting like a 50-year-old. It's like that's right for them at the time, and you get a bit more. I think a better understanding. I always thought that personal training gives you a better understanding of the human condition because the sheer exposure to people with different jobs and different age groups.
Yeah, absolutely. The sample size is massive. So you're getting different careers, different ages, different demographics all over the shop. And I think it's really wonderful. It becomes your own little psychological experiment. You've already got a great sample size there. So, if you were to write a research paper, it would all be probably better than most of the hypertrophy ones. You wouldn't be just, we've studied 18 male, 21-year-old football players. Oh, good. Oh, good. What a wide set of data you have there. It's much more diverse. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's when you start to see people really move and, understanding the psychology of why they prefer certain movements or certain sessions over others. And that's the beauty of coaching. You start to really get your teeth into it if you let yourself.
So what, you talk about different philosophers and how coaches kind of like have different aspects of these different kind of classic philosophers. How about you? What's your coaching style? Where do you think it comes from? Or do you know what I mean in terms of the philosophers out there?
That's a really good question. So right now, I would say I'm quite Kierkegaardian because I've got such a wide disparity of clients and exactly what you said. It's me coming up to them in their space where they're at and not expecting them to be, it would be wrong of me to expect a 21-year-old to eat chicken and broccoli and not go out. It would be wrong of me, and it would make me
not as much nowadays. People are getting it's kind of trendy to be like hardcore and to be built like a Greek god by the time you're 19 now.
Yeah, I know, but it's a real shame because part of coaching is coaching a human being, and fitness is not. It's not about getting that mythical physique, which requires half PTB to be half starved anyway. Unless this client is an actor or someone who's got a role and it's a necessity, there is no reason for someone who is 19 or 20 to feel swayed by the crowds that say this is how you should be fit. This is how
you say that,
it works.
and it's things. It's easy to say that, but times have changed. Like when I was when I grew up. I'm 45 in a couple of weeks, right? So I'm quite a bit older than you. And when I first went to gyms, no one, I was like, when I was like 19, 20, I was in the best shape out of everyone there. And my body was like my body at 20 was very average compared to like most 20-year-olds now. But no one was really in shape. At university, I used to go to the gym all the time. Yeah. No one went to the gym when I was at uni. I was like the real fitness freak because I went like 4 times a week and I went for runs and I played tennis. But now everyone is like, the culture's changed, particularly in the West, the culture's changed where, you are supposed to look amazing. However, whatever the definition of amazing is this season, like a Love Island contestant or like a Gymshark steroid monkey, whatever it may be this year. That's and you see people who are very young like trying to be that way, and you can't really say, well, that's a bad goal, because if that's their world they're in, if that's their culture. It's hard because they do get more, if you're a 20-year-old and you train really hard and you have, let's say you're a girl and you do a load of deadlifts, you do lots of shots, you get lots of followers, you will get a lot of status for that. It may not be great for long-term well-being, and someone older, you think that's a bad path you're going down, but for where they are, they'll get status, they'll get validation, and we all do shit when we're younger to get validation.
Of course.
It's just,
of course.
You talk to them, me, when I did stuff to get validation, there's no recording of it because phones weren't invented then. So I don't need to talk about it now because it exists in history, which is great. So all of zone where we can just, we did our growing up behind closed doors and no one really knew about it, a few photos here and there. But now we live in a different culture, so it's I hear what you're saying, but I just think it's very tricky for like
you are completely right, and there's
like proper young,
absolutely. When you're very impressionable, and it's very, you make such a good point, because it's even a case of being part of the in group, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's a part of our psychology. We all want to be part of the in group, or there's a sense of, from an evolutionary perspective, if we're socially rejected. If you're socially rejected, that's it. You're done. You're dead. You're gone. So there is a drive from our biology as well as the environment, of course, a drive to ensure that we are as conforming to a certain extent to what is considered a high authority or models of behavior that we look at and examine. And everyone's different groups will have different kind of spectacle, higher ups of authority. So, for instance, me watching a lecturer by a top clinical psychologist or neuroscientist, I would think, oh man, it's amazing. I would love to have a conversation with him, or I would want to engage in the delivery or materials or subjects that he's doing because, or they or she or whoever the person is, because that for me is my hierarchical equivalent to a position of authority. For someone, in someone who is on social media or TikTok, which with the younger generation, and that's not to dismiss it, the system is what the system is. For them, that hierarchical authority is someone on TikTok with ripped abs or who has 20 million followers, because they think, wow, that's status. Wow, look at them, they're celebrities, or wow, look, they've got so much kudos going on for them. So it's a really hard one, because you can't outrun the biological need and evolutionary need to conform to an in-group authority, and also the environmental pressures, which there is so much of when someone who's young, and it's very hard to unpick that. So going back to the stages we talked about, if there is a young person in, say, the hedonistic stage, or a stage where it's more like they're trying to do the right thing based on what other people's perceptions are, as you say, it's not inherently wrong, because it's part of their evolutionary drive as a human being and the evolutionary psychology. It's more, I think, about as a coach to, show up for them there and give them guidance based on where they're at, and not to try and make them fit your own perception of what it means to be good. And we all have our own perceptions.
That's an interesting point, because I used to think that, and I don't think that anymore, because now I kind of see it as my role to impose my views, because I think and to lead someone in that way.
Sure.
Yeah, but maybe because I've worked with a lot of people who are in their 20s and are in careers like in the entertainment industry, which is a bit of a weird kind of bubble where it's just it's a weird life to be in if you're an actor or a model or something. And sometimes they're in that kind of that first stage, which Kierkegaard talked about, and they want to get the fact they've hired me. They know that some part of them wants to get healthier, but they're still taking drugs and partying and sleeping around and the rest of it, and living like hedonistic externally, but also internally, their heads all over the place. And it's quite cliched, but it's true. And I've seen it so many times. And I see it as kind of my role to kind of lead them into a less hedonistic, into a healthier way. So even if I'm sort of acknowledging where they're at, but I kind of know that they want to move on.
What model of change?
Why wouldn't have hired me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's about how I teach a bicycle curl. People hire you mainly because of your personality, and if they want to hang out, if they want to learn from you or something, particularly people who can afford any kind of trainer. It's not about how good you are. It's about will they kind of meet me will they help me in terms of my life? Will I want to hang out with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because you are essentially hanging out with them for hours at a time.
Yeah.
As you should be very conversationalist between sets, is what I've learned.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Like I said, look at the trainer who charges the most in the world compared to a complete beginner charged for free. The way they teach the bicep curl is pretty similar. It's not going to be dramatically different. It's conversation in between which makes a big difference.
Absolutely, it's that connection, and it's a priceless thing. You want your coach to care and be indebted to their own education and development as well, but as a result, you have to want the coach to actually like you. Like you have to like the coach as a person. That coach also you don't want the coach to be clock watching, thinking, oh God, session's only done in 10 minutes. You want that coach to almost be buying to train you. They're buying into your progress as much as you want to buy into them in terms of their career.
Don't last very long.
Yeah, I think so, because if they don't enjoy it, they'll get strung out pretty quickly.
Exactly. That's why in the fitness industry there's a huge turnover. People last on average like 3 years, and then most trainers are part-time, not full-time, because it's they're really commit to it. You have to really, really like being with people, and you have to really be really patient. Thousands and thousands of hours telling people to eat a bit less, move a bit more, and do this and drink more water. It's the same shit. So you have to really kind of
same shit, different day.
Yeah,
exactly.
Same shit, different day. Emotionally involved with your clients and really care. And realize that this is a really big deal for them, even if you've done it 1,000 times. It's like
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm programming the same thing again, but for them, it's completely new. It's completely alien. So how you broach it to them and how you, or potentially completely alien, or it might be that they've done it 1,000 times. They need someone else to not sell it to them necessarily, but to package it in a way that feels refreshing to them. So it's a funny one. There's so many avenues a coach can and should take in terms of helping people get out of a rut, whether it be a mental rut, a physical rut, emotional rut, even. It's a coach's opportunity to do that. I think it's an amazing job for that reason.
Well, that's the thing, because you can use your own life experience and your studies and to mold, because it's not like being a personal trainer, you're not told exactly how to do it. It's quite open in terms, it's not like, you know, if you're a lawyer or accountant, there's certain rules you have to stick to. You can't be really that creative. But when you're working someone one-on-one, you can kind of pretty much use any approach to get them where you want to get them, or they want to get to. So you can use your, you know, you're doing an MSc in psychology at the moment, right? You finished it or nearly finished it. So
I'm nearly finished it. Yeah.
You can use that, and also you know a lot about philosophy. You can use that. You know a lot about jiu-jitsu, and you know about the world of modeling as well, which is quite unique for a lot of the clients you work with. That'd be really interesting. So you can use all these different experiences, you know, and you're a big runner. Lots of things that makes you unique, and I think that's what's really fascinating about this industry. Is like, if you let it, you can offer something completely unique, something which I can't teach or another person can't teach.
But that's it. And I think I think this is what saddens me sometimes about the competitiveness in the industry. Sometimes you see it can be quite petty, because I think each coach is different. Someone who buys into another coach won't want to buy into me or buy my products or my services, which is absolutely fine. The way it should be in my eyes. I don't think you should please everyone. You shouldn't. If you're the type of coach that everyone buys from, I think you're not necessarily a coach or a product, or you're something that isn't necessarily real. Because I feel like if you're for everyone, you're for no one, because you're not actually carving out your own, even I dare say brand, but identity that really connects and really can change lives. It's very easy to create a generic program or even a generic blueprint for coaching. Much harder to own who you are, your own value set and uniqueness, as you say. And from there, really attract to the clients. That it's funny. It's a holistic thing, but I do find when you really own who you are as a coach and your skill set, you end up working with clients you love to work with anyway. This is why the hard client is such a vapid trope anyway.
Well, yeah, I mean, if all your clients are nightmares, it's like, well, what's the variable here? You know, so you're right. What you give out, but you know, I think nowadays people are a bit more savvy about the idea of branding and stuff like that. So I think people are better now at like kind of, and realizing that even if you're a bit shit at social media, which I mean, most of us are to a certain degree, you know, but as long as you're yourself on it, then you can, like, you know, if people read your social media posts and then talk to you, they're not going to be like, oh my God, you're so different. But even though it's only one, you know, when you talk about your long blog posts, essentially, it's still you. It's only obviously, I know you well, so it's only one aspect of who you are, but it's still you. You know, so I think people will be surprised.
It's a fascinating concept though, and I find that again, when I was writing the book, it made me really reflect on not only myself as a coach, but I was thinking, you know, there'll be clients in here who would befit different coaches because of the different philosophies and how they match up. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think the more that coaches support this idea of growth and mutually so in the industry, I think the more we'll be able to help people, which is ultimately why we get into the job in the first place. Obviously, we have to pay bills and, you know, make money. Of course, like, that's a human thing and part of it. That's you know, you can't be too fantastical about it. But ultimately, if you did want to do that, you could go into any old job and pay the bills. In fact, you know, I'd argue that especially in the first few years, you don't want to go into coaching in the first few years, because if you want to make just money, because there'll be times where it's very up and down with creating your business. But if you want to come in to really help people change lives and just really breathing the best job in the world, in my eyes, that comes with, I think there should be a more mutual support and understanding of other coaches, because they're not here to take your place. They can't be.
You find it competitive? I don't find it particularly competitive, but maybe I think there's lots of different bubbles, aren't there, when it comes to the industry?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Because I haven't found
it competitive, also depends, but I think it depends on it. I think in my experience, most part hasn't been competitive. It's been mostly collaborative. It's been, from what I've observed, and especially in other gyms, and gyms whereby you do have to advertise yourself a bit more. There's a slight sense of sharkery there. But overall, I think in the general conversation, I think more and more clients and coaches are coming together to talk about their experiences. And I think that can only be a good thing. This openness and, asking what people want and need from either side really helps create that collaborative experience to build something together. It's not the client's not, the coach isn't someone who is dictatorial or tells people what to do. It's a bit like, I see it as sort of someone who is a golf caddy. So I can't swing the golf club for you. That's ultimately your duty to do the work, but I can give you the tools, the golf clubs that you need to swing, which I think is a beautiful relationship if you let it be.
Well, you referenced Campbell in was it in the Nietzsche chapter? Probably was. You talked about the hero's journey, right? And I think it's like I think that's also quite handy to remember that your client is the hero and the coach is the guide. And I think a lot of coaches forget that. I think they're the hero.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're just lying, you idiot. And if you make them feel like you'll be very busy and make a lot of money and you'll be fine.
They got the myth the wrong way around.
Yeah, exactly. No. Well, when I look at social media and I see more kind of like supposedly successful coaches with their tops off, if they're guys, or when tight yoga pants are girls, it's like, well, it's all about you. It's like, that's, it's like, who's going to hire you because you look amazing? It's like, is that, it's like them promoting themselves to be some sort of, to get sponsored. It's not really coaching. That's why sometimes the industry is a little bit confusing, I think, to people outside, where it looks like it's, if you just go on social media, it looks like one thing, but in reality, the world of actual coaching is very different from the world of fitness and, like sort of like showcasing your body fitness. That, I mean, just because someone says coach somewhere in their bio doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're all about. If they don't really care about coaching and their desires are to get sponsored by some supplement brand, that's not really being a coach. So I think in terms of coaches, when you talk to coaches, and I hang out with a lot of coaches, I've talked to many coaches, it is very supportive and very friendly and collaborative. When you go down the other route and you sort of delve into kind of fitfluencers, that word? I don't even know what you call them. Like fitness influencer types. That's when it gets a bit convoluted, and it's like, that's where there's not really a gel, it doesn't really fit.
Absolutely, and you're so right, because social media can be a bit of a wild west. There's not necessarily boundaries for what is and isn't, because you can claim you're an artist, or you can claim you're an entertainer in your bio, and there you are, you're an artist, you're an entertainer. CEO
is my favorite. There's a lot of 19-year-old CEOs. It's like, really, are you really on a board of directors for a multinational company, or are you?
It's bizarre. It's amazing. It's incredible. I mean, it's something really, it's a bit like, it really is unregulated, and the boundaries get so blurred. So people perceive a coach to look a certain way, to behave a certain way. Or some of my favorites is when I think it's because people don't want to be called a personal trainer, which I think is, I love being called a personal trainer, like it's great. But some people call themselves all kinds of things, like movement like physiologist,
movement
expert,
coach, and performance coach, strength coach, lifestyle curator.
So many.
Well-being. I've seen that one.
God,
I think it's hard because I know a lot of really, like, one of the best coaches I know in the world over in LA calls himself a movement coach, and he's a personal trainer. It's like, it's interesting, different. Some people, like, sometimes I flip between calling myself a strength and conditioning coach, and then I sometimes flip back and call myself a trainer, and it depends who I'm trying to appeal. You know what I mean? If I'm
you're right. It is, because unfortunately some people will be like, oh, and then obviously it's a bit like buying in, getting a young child to eat broccoli by luring them in with the candy, and then they're eating the broccoli and they're getting the benefits. Sometimes it's necessary. One of my favorites is by a label by Nick Chiminello, and I still use the label, and he's like a PE teacher for adults, and I love it. It's just so great. It makes me laugh every time, and I'm like, PE teacher for adults.
My wife always gets annoyed at me. It's quite often when we didn't, obviously we're in lockdown now, but we don't know what I did. I'd often just say fitness instructor, because I just couldn't be asked with all the hassle of like, well, you're a trainer. Do you train it? Normally it's like, do you train anyone famous? And it's like, that's the first question. And it's like so boring, because if you don't, you just feel like an idiot. And if you do, then you sound like a twat. So you can't win. You can't win whatsoever. And also, if you're like normal body like mine, they're like, oh, you don't look like a trainer. Or if you're completely jacked, then it's like, oh, then you just look like a cliche. So again, you can't win. So it's there's a lot of connotations. I guess something like, you know, if you say you're a model, people automatically assume, oh, okay, so you're stupid. And it's like, well, no. It's like, no, it's just that I happen to be. Yes, it's a very funny one. So yeah, you've always called yourself a trainer? You haven't been tempted by some of the fluffier?
Oh, like personal trainer or coach is fine. Coach makes me sound quite. I mean, I say coach. I feel like I'm in one of those like American films, which is great. Like I think mine says PT at one point because I couldn't fit in
PT so now in America means physical therapist. So Americans won't get what you do.
It's very confusing. Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, God damn, the character live it on Instagram.
Well, hopefully one day,
where I'm like,
if we work hard enough, my plan is not to have a bio. I kind of want to have no website as well. That's one of my goals. To have no website, no bio, but still be able to make money and make a living, but be already kind of known. But until I'm more successful, I have to tell people what I do, which is really annoying, you know.
Dan, you can just have an NFT of yourself. Be like, this is my NFT.
No, just like TikTok and just like many things, I'm happy to let that whole thing just completely bypass. I'm happy. That's the nice thing about getting older. I don't feel I have the need to stay current at all. I have no idea who's in the top 40 in the charts, if they still on the charts.
Neither, actually.
Got no idea. And yeah, it is nice not caring so much. Like TikTok, really I don't see me doing a TikTok account. You know, it's great. It's great, not caring.
I remember one of my friends being like, why don't you go on TikTok? You'll be great. You can talk about science research in the 30-second videos. I thought, that I can't do that in 30 seconds. That's the point. That's why TikTok isn't.
No, but you could get away with it because you're like, you look good and you've got content and you're young enough. If I went on, I'm too old. You know what I mean? I'm too old.
I mean, I don't have TikTok, but my friends will send me things where it's literally, there's like old, this is not you, I don't want to say, when I say old couples, I don't want to suggest you or your wife are old, but as in people in their like 70s doing TikTok. I'm thinking.
But that's different. That's when you're like retired and you're allowed to do anything you want.
Yeah.
But it's when you're kind of, I think my age is like, you know, 40s. 40s is normally, you know, I'm pretty much smack bang in the middle of my 40s. And that's the age where really you should have your shit together. You should be, you know, I say should, but I think you should be kind of like, you know, normally in a stable relationship and your career settled. And it's like, if you've got goals, that's where you achieve them. You know, the 40s is a key decade. 20s, like Kierkegaard, I think is a hedonistic decade. I don't think it should be stopping at 21. I think the whole of your 20s. I don't think if you're achieving, you're missing out. It should be about making mistakes. And what I like in your book, I've seen twice so far, you talk about the importance of regret, which I love. You mentioned that because so many people saying, oh, you should never regret anything. I was like, oh, you fucking children. Of course you should regret things. That means you haven't really done enough exciting, wild things. You haven't got regrets, you know?
And regret is an important evolutionary mechanism because it teaches us, hey, the thing that you didn't feel good, don't do it again. Otherwise you'll feel bad again.
Yeah, and it has consequences. Kind of maturity to say, you know what? I didn't play that year right. I mean, I can look back at certain years of my life. I'm like, you know what? That 3-year period, I didn't really play it right. Rather than saying, oh, I regret nothing, you know, or relationships. Oh no, well, that girl I went out with 5 years, probably shouldn't have done. You know, it's like there's nothing wrong in saying that because it means you're kind of owning up to kind of mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with mistakes either. And it's you're right. It's a weird culture we live in where you can't do anything wrong. Like your body's perfect, no matter what. It's like, well, is it? What's wrong with saying, you know what? Yeah, my body's fine, but I want to be slimmer, or I'd like to have bigger biceps. What's wrong with that?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's and then as soon as that connotation of, you know what, I am a human being with faults and flaws. It's a weird one because it simultaneously says accept and own your flaws, but then oh no, but you're perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with you. It's such a dichotomous conversation. It's really hard for people to manage.
When you actually try to have a conversation, not reply comment on some meme, but actually have a conversation with someone who believes it falls quite quickly. Same with like an anti-vaxxer or something. You know, it's like it's very you actually have a conversation. Or a flat earther. I had a conversation with a flat earther a little while ago. Once you actually have a conversation, it becomes very clear that they stop, because normally in a conversation there's certain rules you agree to, like logic and stuff. And when that goes out, you're like, okay, then the conversations end, and you realize it doesn't really work.
Absolutely. I had a very similar experience with someone who didn't believe in gravity, and so it was amazing.
Were they floating when they said this, or?
Well, this is the thing, and they said I remember them saying it was very conspiratorial, and they said to me, "That's what they want you to believe," and I was like, "You mean the science?" And they're like, "Yes," like with complete straight face. And they said, "What about birds?" I was like, "No, there's a thing called thrust. It's horses. Again, if you learn the science, this explains it all." It was mad. They were saying, "What about birds? What about airplanes? Why are they in the air?" I'm like, "This is not how
about the
this
planet
works." It was incredible. But I think, and again, it's one of those things. I think I was in so much shock, and I was thinking, "There's no way." Even if I laid out Einstein's exact way of thinking and gave you one of those GCSE science physics textbooks, the ones that are really fun with loads of pictures, there is no way you'd agree. There just wouldn't be, because they were not reasoned into that using logic, that position. So it's very hard to reason someone out of that position.
Well, when people have an idea of something, and it sort of, it's same as religion, when people have an idea which is very close to their heart, and a lot of people, we all have opinions nowadays. I don't know if we have more opinions, maybe they was more vocal about it because of social media, but if something feels very, very personal to you, like religion, for example, if you're, very strongly believe that there was Christ and you're a Christian, and that's part of who you are, it's very hard, and there's faith attached to that, not science. It's very hard to actually argue saying no, you're wrong, because it's like, and there's no real point doing that either. But when people have any kind, this is why studying philosophy is so helpful. I mean, I think if you look at the world we live in now, there's some major things going on. I mean, major things where if you had an understanding of philosophy, I think it would better inform you. For example, ethics. Okay, right now, like the West, we have a shitload of vaccines, so much in fact that some people march because they don't even want them. And there's some
it's mind-boggling,
which will do anything for vaccines. And it's like, ethically, if you take a step back, there's a real interesting issue going on about how we distribute resources in the world, and that's ethics. And if you study political philosophy, you think about theory of justice and redistribution, and what do we do with Afghanistan? All those refugees, like, they shouldn't come here, or should they come here? It's like, well, Germany had a policy, then England had France had a very different policy. What's right? What's wrong? Well, it's hard. You can't say, oh, we should do this, we should open every border, or we shouldn't, because there's ramifications. But if you actually studied things like Hobbes' social contract, or understood some basic ideas of capitalism, Adam Smith and Marx, and then you can actually inform actually, this is really messy and complex, which I think you referenced quite a bit. Life is very messy, which I love it when you talk about that, because it is. That's what's so beautiful about it, and it is really messy. But if we have philosophical inquiry, we can use our brains to actually think things through, like like the vaccine. Like, what do we do in a pandemic? This is, if people weren't so sort of charged, for me, it's quite straightforward what we do, because I've thought about it, and I think about things quite rationally. And for example, for me, my political views are quite libertarian, and I think we should look after the more vulnerable in society. So for me, I think we should focus on more vulnerables. So for me, that means in favor of lockdowns, not because I am a sheep, no, because that's my political disposition. Okay, so I think if we understand our rationale, why we believe certain things, so I could happily argue why I think we should close down a bit more, because it comes from a belief system based on actual thinking about stuff, rather than just a knee-jerk reaction that I'm this way or that way. And I think, I don't know, what do you think? The importance of philosophy in modern living.
No, I completely agree, and I think actually there was I completely agree, and I think one of the reasons I did write the book initially as well was to try and promote this idea of practicality in philosophy and having that practical element. So a great example with the pandemic, for instance, what I love was your example about how you got to your point, because ultimately that's one of the most important factors, because intention, as Kant talks about, is incredibly important in how we inform ourselves. So, for instance, you could be someone who's pro-lockdown because you don't want to go to work again. I'm not saying I'm pro-lockdown for the same reasons you are. Whereas you could be pro-lockdown for the reasons you state. So it's important to also demarcate why you came to that conclusion, right? And so this is where it kind of flies in the face of people. So it's very frustrating sometimes, or sometimes I've just avoided it now completely because there's no point. But with people who say things like you're a sheep or you just comply, they've completely missed the point of your logic. They've jumped from here to here and they've filled in that gap for you, even though that's not your belief system, which is why it's particularly psychologically grating when you're trying to have a conversation. And I think actually there's some really interesting articles. Google, for instance, philosophy is becoming more prevalent. Google are now hiring ethical philosophers for the AI systems because AI is going to become massive in terms of what happens when you've got a driverless car and it's a bit like the trolley problem. You've got two people on the road, and how can they evade that situation as best as possible? How can you program the car to make an ethical decision? That's a huge one. So there's lots of ramifications in the future and in modern day.
But even now, I mean, Sophie, think about ethics. At the moment, our morality is slightly gauged by what Facebook deems as moral. Because if you look at free speech, which basically with social media companies, let's say Facebook, who look after Instagram and Facebook, they're saying that free speech is good. However, hate speech is bad. And what else is bad? Like, I guess overtly racist behavior is speech is bad. But it's okay to have views which are wrong, which could hurt people. Which is very relevant in the anti-vax community. It's like, well, should that be allowed or not? I mean, at what point, if you study ethics, you think, well, who makes these decisions? Should it be company? Because they are at the moment. They're deciding who has a platform or not. So they very much are deciding our kind of our moral landscape in a certain degree. Should it be government telling us? I think one of the roles of government is to actually lead us and to showcase morality. That's why, and I have certain views about how the government have done things, which has been a bit, I think, at odds with how I think government should act in terms of taking a leadership role. So, for example, because I believe governments should take a leadership role, and that includes in their messaging, because how you message things is also part of how you communicate, how you lead. If you say, hey, it's your choice if you wear a mask or not, then it's saying it's not that important. And if you look at other countries say, hey, you must wear a mask because of this, there'll be more compliance to it. So it's like, I think we've seen in the UK that actually people quite like strong leadership, like we had in wars and stuff. People love Churchill, very strong leadership. And I think people would have, even if they disagreed with it, what people don't like is inconsistency. So I think part of human nature is needing kind of leadership and knowing, like a kid likes to have structure,
framework. It's followed, and you nailed it, because of course it feeds the fuel or fire into the anti-mask, anti-lockdown rhetoric, because then you've got you've got MPs swanning off, not abiding by rules, and having Christmas parties when there's loved ones on their deathbed because we're trying to abide by the rules. There's a complete disconnect between the leadership and their values.
That it's not important.
Exactly. And so, as you say, there's this kind of collective psychology where people are saying, oh, it doesn't matter, oh, it's just this, oh, it's just not wearing a mask, oh, it's just the flu, it's just a cold, etc., etc. And it kind of ferments into this collective ideology about the pandemic not really being that important or not being serious. Completely agree. I think one of the role, I'm not, in the sense that some people are very pro free market, very pro private corporation. I are on the side more of government. I don't think they're not perfect. They're humans, so that of course they're not infallible, and they have the same follies that all of us non-government workers have, of course. But you can't have, for instance, we don't have an omniscient, for instance, deity ruling the country playing chess with us, or like a Sims game. We have a government. It's the best we kind of have at times. So with that being said, the role of the government, in my eyes, should be the one to kind of create this social contract, not only to encourage it or to produce it themselves, but to live by it. And it's very interesting, because when you look at the history of British monarchs, and I'm not a monarchist myself, and I'm not someone who thinks we should have a king ruling the country, but it was very interesting because in the past we've always had this contractual monarchism, so not someone who's been ruling the country for a long period of time after we had kings and such. But when there was a period where kings were ruling, again, this is not something I actually advocate at all, but it was interesting because there was a lot more, besides of course the odd revolt, there was a lot more trust in the king figure, because they were assigned by God, and the concept of God. So again, this idea of this person who had values and morals as per the divine intervention set for them to rule, made them have a more, I suppose, imposing leadership, in the sense that people were then more obliged to act out certain rules. And of course, the threat of beheading is never fun. Of course, there's always that. But when you have a government that's very laissez-faire in politics and in personality, and a government that is very diluted in what they stand for, you create a complete lack of trust between you, the ruler, or the person in charge, and the general citizen. So when they keep trying to enforce things or trying to suggest things, it just falls on deaf ears, and it actually stokes the fire for it, which is very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
It also, I think, studying philosophy, political philosophy, it's very interesting when you think of things like Brexit, and you see the downside of democracy.
Yeah.
That's very interesting concept.
It's a very interesting concept, because also I think actually it kind of plays into the pandemic as well, because you have people saying it's my choice to have a vaccine, it's my choice, my medical choice. But to what extent do you, a person who has no knowledge about how vaccinations or science papers or research works, at what point do you say it's my choice, versus when a scientist whose job it is to not only create these vaccines,
well,
but set up
I'm going to give a visual example. If people don't know where I stand, it's my right to go like this and to punch as hard as I can. It's not my right to be standing right next to your face. We all have rights, exactly. But when they affect other people, we
exactly.
Then we have to. This is philosophy. Ethics talks about this.
Exactly.
Jurisprudence. You study all this stuff. There's actually a lot of thought gone into this, and you have to. It's not like you have to study philosophy, but you have to just think for a second. It's like when you keep going on about your rights. It's like, well, at some point, your rights, when they impose on someone else's rights, there's obviously, you can't both have rights if you're both.
Yeah. One is being harmed at the expense of another.
Yeah,
exactly.
Then you're imposing because you're saying rights are really important. So if rights are really important, they must be important to your brother over there. But if he's being hurt by you exercising your rights, then that's not right. That can't be right. That's hypocritical.
It is exactly. And I think it's very telling as well. Richard Dawkins, as much as sometimes his political commentary I don't necessarily agree with, because I think he's a very good scientist, don't necessarily think he's great at analysing politics, but he made a very good point for anti-plebiscism during the Brexit period, where he was saying, none of these people work for the EU. None of these people actually know the laws of the EU. None of these people have actually understood or read a book on the EU. Not to criticise them, but in the same way as I wouldn't go and rewire my house. I would hire an electrician because I don't know anything about wires. I wouldn't then think, you know what, I'm an expert on the EU, or you know what, I've listened to one Joe Rogan interview, I'm an expert on vaccines, I'm not going to take the vaccine. I, for one, would trust scientists and policymakers who've had years of experience. I don't know anything about this. I'm going to trust them and look at the research which has been thoroughly done and look at the data, which is in keeping with everything they're saying, with the claims they're saying, rather than listen to a conspiracy theorist who thinks that vaccines are going to, give us.
We all have a microphone now. We all it used to be quite hard to get your message out there. You have to be an author or be a public figure, be a noted scientist, a noted politician. Now everyone can write an ebook. Everyone can amass followers on social media. Everyone has got a microphone. And because of that, there's no real editing going on. So there's so much information, and there's so much information everywhere. It's like, it's quite overwhelming to know where to look. That's why I think employing critical reasoning is increasingly important, to actually think, where am I going to find this? Like fitness, where shall I find my information? Should I follow you or me? Or should I follow some influencer? Should I read a book? Well, it doesn't really matter, really. What matters is it's the process of getting to that decision. It's like, well, where do you want your information from? Do you want it from someone who's experienced? Do you want to read from the source material? How much time you'd be willing to put into this? Do you want to get a degree in kinesiology? But you have to kind of make a decision rather than just let it. So otherwise, we're exposed to all these ideas. If we don't really make an actual conscious decision, we're just going to be slave to whatever ideas happen to be floating around.
Yeah, exactly.
And that means whatever the algorithm happens to be popular, which is a nightmare.
Yeah, you make such a good point. You're at the mercy of as you say, a binary code that feeds into things that you already
unless you
believe
take
creates a
control
bubble.
by
Exactly.
actively making decision. Where am I going to get my information from? Like with
Absolutely.
science, am I going to choose this, Djokovic, to take an example, or shall I choose a tennis player, or shall I choose maybe a virologist? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a hard choice.
It's very tough.
One's made loads of money with the sport. The other is humbly working in a science lab. Hard choice.
Yes, it's very interesting times. So, what's happening for you this year? What's your plan for this year, Sophie?
So it's a really, really excellent question. So I'm planning on, I've actually got ideas for a fictional book that I want to start writing. So actually moving on from non-fiction to fictional in my own time. So I'll be building on that. And most of my year will be built around my thesis for my master's. So I'll be looking at the research for that alongside my coaching.
What area of psychology are you writing in?
I very much enjoy cognitive.
Okay.
Because I like looking at the behaviors based on phenomena in the brain. So one of the things that has been interesting me a lot recently has been like learning a memory. And actually, right now, one of the research questions I'm looking at right now is moral development. So it's interesting because it's not from a philosophical point of view. It's looking at psychological point of view. So it's looking at behaviors, infant behaviors. How do infants, if they can, discern between right and wrong behavior? So what I plan on doing, I think, with my dissertation or my thesis, will be actually looking at research methodologies in psychology in regards to behaviors like that. Because one of the issues in psychology, and one of the crises we're having in terms of research, is because it's such a broad science, and a lot of people mock psychology. Most people, so I've had people say to me, "It's not a real science," jokingly, and I just laugh with them because right now the research is in such a disarray. I'm not inclined to disagree. One of the issues we're facing is that when you sometimes when you set out to do a research paper, one thing that happens is the scientist or the researcher has a hypothesis, and then you do everything in your power in your experiment to try and disprove it, because you want to be as rigorous and thorough as possible in the way you design your experiment. Now, the problem with psychology, because it's so broad and because a lot of the things aren't quite so quantifiable, you end up basically trying to, the researcher ends up just affirming his own gut instinct about something rather than looking at the causes and the relationships between things. So in psychology now, what they're trying to do is, with research, they're trying to branch out into things like Bayesian and neural networks. And what they do is they're trying to look at essentially algorithms or branches and properties of certain sets and relationships between factors and variables in a way that mimics how the brain change things together, essentially. And what this does, it's hopefully going to open up more opportunities for research, because then we're not going to be closed in to this tick box era of, yes, this data has proved the hypothesis, when it hasn't actually said anything. So it's going to open up more data opportunities and research opportunities for researchers to look at why humans behave the way we do. So that's what I'm planning to specialize in my thesis this year. Wow. And so I'm really excited about that. And apart from that, building on my coaching business and hopefully continuing to help my current clients.
It's so impressive you're doing them. I mean, as you know, about 10 years ago, I was doing a master's at the same time as being a trainer, and I was writing my final thesis, and halfway through, I legged it off and moved to Thailand.
It's so hard.
I couldn't handle it. It's just too much work. And my passion for it was 20,000, I think it was, is it 25,000 words final thesis? I think it's, or 40,000.
Yeah, it depends, but it's around that. Yeah.
I think mine was 25,000. Mine was philosophy, obviously. Mine was philosophy of the mind, which I found fascinating. That's my favorite kind of topic, like Daniel Dennett and a bit of Nozick. Fascinating stuff. But
Chalmers and stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, I only did a master's because I was intellectually bored with my job. I was a trainer. Cool. I still am now, but I didn't have a company behind me, which is quite complex. You know, there's always shit to do. When you have a company, there's always things going on. But when you're just a freelancer, once you kind of achieve all your goals and you're charging what you want to charge and training you want to train, it's not intellectually that stimulating.
Of course,
trainer, you know? So I was like, I need to do something else. And I was like, fuck it, I'll do a master's degree. But after a couple of years, I was like, yeah, that's when I went off and decided to become a fighter. You know, but I'm very impressed that you're sticking with it, because
no, honestly, Dan,
I regret not finishing it.
There's a regret for you. I completely sympathise, because honestly, I've had to, the past year or so, I've had to cut back my coaching just to suit Midgeon.
And you've written a book as well. I mean, you're doing a master's,
Yeah.
wrote a book, coach.
And in fairness, I wrote the book during lockdown. So, and I was obviously coaching people through Zoom, which was an amazing opportunity and great for finessing my coaching. But, you know, with lockdown, you know, I didn't have the commute. I didn't have many factors that do eat away at your time. So I could sit down and write a book. So I had the luxury of that. Some people, bless their hearts, you know, were still working in lockdown or really sick during lockdown and had so much going on in lockdown. So I say to people, as much as I did write a book, I was fortunate with my circumstances that I could. I'm not going to be David Goggins and say, just write a book. You know, sometimes you'll be given opportunities, and people have different levels of, you know, we can all do our best in certain thresholds, I believe. But some people, I had a lot of wiggle room in that threshold, and that afforded me the time to do it, and time, emotional labor, everything. So, you know, I was very lucky. I know lockdown was horrible for many people, and you know, it's a horrible necessity. But I'm grateful for what it gave me in that sense, and I know a lot of people didn't get that. So
you're a good example of just making the most of it, because you never know what life's going to throw at you. So I think if you are healthy and you've got a bit of time, that's the time you want to achieve, because just as life goes on, as we both know, sometimes things get in the way, which aren't our faults, and we always make things possible. That's why you have to kind of grab opportunities or create opportunities, and while you can, you don't want to look back and think, oh my God, why did I watch TV for 6 months? I could have
so much Netflix.
Talking of films, what do you like? You like philosophy. What are your favorite philosophical films?
It's a really, really good question. One that I really like, and I cite a lot, because also it has the aspect of, it has like intersecting different types of philosophy. It's Interstellar. So you obviously have the notion of, you know, it's a notion of like quantifying love, and also noting, you know, also the idea of, you know, why do we leave this planet, or do we try and fix it? We've just messed it up. Do we even what do we leave it to die? Do we go somewhere else? Have we learned our lessons? What does it mean for space travel? Is it a very classist system whereby we're only allowing certain few people to experience it? I think it has a lot of questions, and even philosophy of time, and even philosophy of time travel, you want to go into that. I really liked it because it held a lot of questions. It had the scientific aspect, which was fascinating, but also the philosophical aspect of what does it mean to love, and what does it mean to love one another? What does it mean to care for where we're at now? What is technological advancement necessarily a good thing by default? And questioning that as well. I thought it was really well done. I really enjoyed it.
It was actually, in all of Chris Nolan's films, there's always a very clear philosophical thread. I mean, even in like the one with Heath Ledger, that's, I mean, where you know, where he blows up, and there's two ships.
The Dark Knight.
They can blow up each other.
Oh yeah,
that's a classic like thought experiment. That's classic ethics and morality, you know. So in all his films, there's always a lot of philosophy.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot as well. So that's one that I really, really enjoy. It's been you know, it's funny, I've been reading so much recently. It's been a while since I've sat down and watched a really good film. Now this is cheating a bit because it's an adaptation of a book, but I thought the film adaptation was very good. And it's called Never Let Me Go, and I cried like a baby when I watched it, because
I've not heard of that.
It's very good. The book is great. The book is also very emotional, but the film is great if you want to watch something. And it's got Keira Knightley in. I can't remember who else, but it's a very good film, and it's about a kind of an alternate universe, a bit dystopian, and it's about essentially these human beings who think they're humans, but actually they're clones, and they're being cloned to essentially be harvested for their organs at a certain age, for someone else who is basically their perfect match. So essentially, it's a human farm where they go to boarding school, they get treated really well. They're all very happy until they reach a certain age, and then their organs are getting harvested. And it really begs the question as to, you know, even the ethical ramifications of rearing a clone who's not human, but is human in every aspect, despite the name people give them.
Yeah.
Is that something we should be doing to another
philosophy of identity? You know, like
exactly.
It's like is it facetious? What's the name of the ship? That famous the ship? Facetious, not facetious.
Not Ulysses, no.
The ship where if you get a ship and it breaks down bit by bit, if a piece of wood falls off a ship and keeps
that one. Yeah. I can't remember the name of it.
But yeah, and eventually, with all the bits of driftwood, you build another ship. Is that new ship, the old ship? You know, it's like a clone.
Exactly.
Like, you know, like if you take your brain now and put it into someone else, if you take your brain and put it into another girl's body, we'd probably say, yeah, that's Sophie in another girl's body. But how if we take half your brain and put it in her head and half your brain in someone else's head? Who are you then? How about if we, and why your brain? How about your eyes? How about your nose? How about, it's
and
it's,
like
cloning is
philosophical
really...
zombies, even if they, you know, P zombies, are they people despite having no sense of consciousness? Are they conscious? Are they experiencing? I love stuff like that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, no,
that film is great. I'd recommend it.
Okay.
Very emotional.
Matrix
very good.
Is a classic in terms of philosophy. The Matrix.
Yeah, of course. Matrix is amazing. I can't believe I didn't think of the Matrix.
Concepts, you know, from like Descartes, Spinoza, even religious stuff. Like you could see him as like a Christ figure.
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently the new one's not good.
Clever.
Apparently the new one's not good.
Isn't it? Oh, it's a shame.
No,
I haven't been
apparently
seeing
it's not.
so long anyway, but
my boyfriend loves the first one, like we all do, and he saw the first one, the second new one.
The second one's really philosophical. It's not quite.
No, not the second one, the new one out now, and he was like, no.
Oh, shame. I mean, I'll still see it. I'll still rent it, but I mean, it's a
yeah, exactly. It's not. It's a renter. It's not. It's a streamer. It's not a watcher. Yeah.
Again, the guy, girls actually who wrote and directed Matrix, the Wachowski sisters. They are very, very clever because they did a series for Netflix called Sense8. Have you seen it?
Oh, Sense8! I love Sense8.
I adore that. That was the Wachowski sisters.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Well, they were brothers. They're both transgender, which is quite rare. So a lot of their films are very much about identity. You know, even the Matrix, they said that's partly we're going through a change, and we want to talk about the importance of change and finding out who you truly are. So that comes out.
You know what I find really funny about that as well is that obviously, like, there's a lot of right-wing Republican dialogue where it's like take the red pill, and the whole film was about like identity and their personal experience of transgenderism and stuff.
Because the red pill for Republicans means the opposite of, like, the red pill in the Matrix was that's when you open your eyes, right? The red pill was what to see the real truth and become who he really wants to be, and the Republicans have completely reversed it.
Yes. Funny.
Not that surprising, is it?
Yeah, I know.
And how about books? Favorite philosophical books?
So I read. It's quite dry, but well, I loved it. But I read one recently that was really good, Sounding of Semantics, which was philosophy of language, and it was actually very good. It was controversial. It had like different opinions on linguistics and origin. So you had like the Pinker and the Chomskys versus like whether or not we learn language externally. It was very good.
Was Wittgenstein into that? I can't remember. I don't think.
Wittgenstein is mentioned in it. Wittgenstein is actually, it's funny. He's one of my favorite philosophers, but he actually is quite anti-philosophy. Like it's weird. I think he's a really clever guy, but he doesn't like metaphysics at all. He hates it. And he talks about like language and experience and how it shapes our experience of the world. Like a good example is Wittgenstein would ask something like, is a hot dog a sandwich? And he'd be like, yeah, it is a sandwich, because of, which obviously we think, well, no, but he argues that on the basis of what we define a sandwich to be and its properties, a hot dog is technically a sandwich. So it's funny. He does really clever little language games like that.
I haven't read. I mean,
I don't agree with him, but I think he's funny and good to read. He's very cynical.
I'm quite. I haven't read much philosophy recently. I tend to go, but I like existentialism, so I tend to go back to Camus and Sartre and Kierkegaard, because I just like that. It appeals to me because I think that way. So I should kind of be the opposite, but it appeals to me, that kind of stuff. I guess like you too. You like those kind of things, don't you?
Oh, me too. I reread Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard, which I really like, because it's using an analogy of like a religious faith, like Isaac and Abraham, and sacrifice, going to sacrifice his son for God. And obviously, people have misinterpreted it, saying yes, he should have sacrificed his son, but it's not. He was saying his leap of faith, trust in God, is something that is can be replicated in our leap of faith in life. So even if we think, oh, this is going to go really wrong, I don't know why I'm doing it, having a faith in something bigger than yourself, not necessarily religious, but having a trust in something bigger than yourself, can often mean that we live more fulfilling lives. It's a very good book, very well written.
Yeah, I think it's quite hard to argue against that, isn't it? I think most people would agree that's quite a good way of living.
I know. Kierkegaard, I think, well, I'm biased, I really like Kierkegaard, but I think it's very hard to argue against some of his points. Very good writer, very good thinker.
Yeah. No, actually, reading your book has made I haven't read any philosophy in I don't know, 5 years or so, 4 years. So it's actually made me go, oh my God, I need to start reading again, because
I've amazing.
I've forgotten some stuff I've read. I recognize the names. I'm like, I'm sure I read a few of his books and I can't remember anything he said. And I'm reading your summary. I'm like, oh, is that what I'm supposed to get out of it? Because sometimes
brilliant.
like these books, you kind of forget. Because when you don't apply something, you kind of, like anything, any kind of knowledge, if you're not really applying it, you kind of forget about it. Like a lot of sports science stuff I've read over the years when I was training like pro athletes, I don't really know anymore because I don't use it day in, day out. We kind of that's an annoying thing about knowledge. It doesn't really stick unless we kind of use it. So and
it's ever evolving in some senses.
It's
something that always has to be touched up upon. It's bizarre. It's such a fascinating concept.
All right, well, Sophie, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Love chatting to you. I haven't talked to you in ages. Absolutely. It's been really nice.
Yeah, it was so great.
Your book. Fridays are my kind of relaxing day because I deserve that because I've worked hard over the years. Friday, I tend to do a podcast every Friday, which essentially means talking to a friend about stuff I like. So it's been great. And then just reading and
amazing. Thank you, Dan.
Around. So that's my plan. So
love chatting with you.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, Dan. See you later.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the MX Podcast. All feedback, reviews, and social shares are very much appreciated. To find out more about the Methodology X Online Members Club, our award-winning MX Group fitness classes, or to join our global family of MX instructors, please visit danrobertsgroup.com.